Thank you, everyone, for joining me here this week on our Conversations with Cabral, where I speak with our special guest, James Nestor. James wrote a book called Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. And believe it or not, I actually remember reading James' work many, many years ago when he wrote for one of my favorite outdoor magazines, Outside Magazine. And he also has previous work from when he studied freedivers and people that could professionally hold their breath for minutes at a time, some even close to 10 minutes, and really began to explore the properties as to how someone would be able to dive hundreds of feet under the water with just a single breath. We go deep in our conversations today. It was a fun time. It really was, because James knows this subject inside and out, and I'm always trying to relate how people's underlying root cause imbalances can actually be affected by some outside sources. And so what we actually spoke about was breathing-based patterns, sleep posture, how the adenoids and tonsils can actually affect the shape of our face, how they can affect how the teeth come in. We speak about processed food and its repercussions on facial shape as well, dating back to some of Weston Price's work. We even get into the Tumo monks who are able to heat up their body temperatures for an external reading of about 17 degrees and melt the snow around them. Pretty amazing. We also chat about the seemingly immortal later Japanese women who dive all the way into their 80s, and they're able to hold their breath for 3 or 4 minutes at a time and go down 100 feet or so just to catch fish and sea life to be able to provide for themselves. So really fascinating conversation. I know that you'll enjoy it. One last disclaimer I do have to add is that we speak about so many benefits of certain styles of breathing and I would say parasympathetic nervous system work that I have to add that standard disclaimer that we are not providing medical-based advice. We are not providing diagnosis, treatment protocols, or cures. Of course, seek out your licensed medical doctor for all of those things. What we do is we look at the underlying root causes that may be holding you back from living your best life and being well. Enjoy the show, and I'll talk with you after the show. Take care.
Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
James, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak with you here today about this important topic. It is one that I've spoken about and brought up on the show, but never in long form to this degree. And that's why it's exciting to have you on here today. One of the most interesting things when I was getting into your book, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is your interest in the field of freediving and how it got you into your work on breath work. So I'd love to hear that. And it's an exciting story. So I know my listeners would love to hear it as well.
I was sent by Outside Magazine to write a story about freedivers competing in the world championship for freediving. And I was sent to Greece, and I saw these people hold their breath for 4, 5, 6 minutes at a time and dive down to depths just far beyond what I ever thought would be possible. 300 or 400 feet on a single breath of air. And it just completely blew me away. And I was lucky enough to meet some freedivers who weren't so much into the competitive side of this, but who were looking at freediving and using it to understand their bodies, to understand their connection to the ocean, to understand the art of breathing. And so they really led me into this world. And my first book, Deep, there was a lot of freediving in it, freediving physiology, human connection to the ocean. But I kept finding these crazy stories that didn't fit into that book that I just filed away. And eventually that file was big enough that I thought maybe there was another book in here.
Yeah, and it's funny too, some of the things that we're most passionate about, they they keep creeping up on you. They won't go away. And you know that that's the itch that you have to scratch eventually, maybe not this year, but maybe a year from now, 2 years from now. And for you, I just think that this is one of the reasons why things really gain in popularity, meaning that you are becoming the go-to person to speak on this subject. Yourself, Patrick McKeown, that we had on just probably about 2 months ago, because your passion intertwines with your work, and people know that. Like, the energy just resonates. You love talking about the subject, and you got into freediving yourself. Is that correct?
For sure. As part of my process of writing about this, you can only sit on a boat for so long and see these people do these miraculous things. So I had zero interest in competitive freediving, which I still am not a big fan of. But the other side of freediving, this underwater meditation, this underwater yoga, in which you are silent participant in the whole marine life cycle. And what I mean by that is, when you're able to freedive, you don't have a scuba tank, you don't have bubbles, you don't have any of that. So you're able to just interact with sea life in a way that you can't otherwise. And they accept you as part of their community. So sharks come right up to you, dolphins come right up to you, sperm whales come right up to you. You can freedive down around 40 feet and sit on the ocean floor and have all these fish sort of swim around you and welcome you into this amazing world. So that's what really got me excited about learning how to freedive. And I did it responsibly. And I did it with some of the best teachers on the planet, which was a fringe benefit of writing about this. So freediving is a part of my life. I still do it as often as I can. A lot of people hear these daredevil stories of people trying to go down 500 feet or 600. No, this stuff has been around for at least 10,000 years. We have archaeological evidence, freediving been around that long. And the Ama women out in Japan, they've been doing it for about 2,000 years. And I met some of these women, and they're in their 80s, and they dive every day. So it's that side of freediving, that nurturing, meditative side that I miss so much in this pandemic. I'm not able to do it here in San Francisco, and I can't wait till things open up and I'm able to get back in the water.
For sure, getting back to nature. I think being in nature itself is very healing for the body. I mean, that's part of the traditional naturopathy. When you go back to the 1800s, they took people out, and absolutely they did fasting, but they also did mineral-based water therapy, spas. All of those things were very, very essential. But breathing is one of the cornerstones. And I think why it fits so well with the free divers, besides being able to oxygenate the tissues and be able to really control that breath, is that you're controlling your nervous system. And so it's the understanding that your breath and your nervous system go hand in hand. So if you're hyperventilating or not breathing, anything of the two sides of that equation, that sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight, is going to be then exacerbated. And I think that worst case scenario, you're going to end up in a panic attack. Like there's no doubt about that. But I think really the effects are chronic. It's over time what happens to the body by not breathing properly. And I would love for you to discuss a lot of the different symptoms that end up moving towards a disease-based state when we have chronic improper breathing techniques.
For sure. And I just want to sort of double click on something you mentioned there is free diving. You can't do it stressed out. You can't do it panicky. You're going to last 2 seconds. You're going to come back up to the surface. So it's really a forced meditation. You have to get in touch with your body and get in touch with your nervous system. And you do that by focusing on your breath. So once you're able to do that in the water, you can then take those skills and use them on land. And if you look at humans right now, we are, and I mentioned this in the book, the worst breathers in the animal kingdom. And that seems very clear. We're obstructive, we're panicky, we're breathing dysfunctionally throughout the day. And many of us don't realize this because the body is very good at compensating, but compensating is different than being healthy. So I've seen this over several years working with several leaders in the field. So many people who had various problems, hypertension, even metabolic issues, irritable bowel syndrome, migraines. They were being treated for each of those individual things, but nobody was looking at the core issue behind all of that. And if you cure the core issue, you're going to take care of so many of those other symptoms related to it. I'm not saying everything's tied to breathing. It's not, of course. But in the same way that we look at diet, in the same way that we look at exercise and sleep, we have to be looking at breathing. It is an equal part of that system of health.
I agree for the simple fact that we look at that we need oxygen for life, and it's just degrees, as you said. I mean, we're all breathing, but it doesn't mean that it's functional breathing, that it's actually dysfunctional based breathing. And the difference is, if you want to meditate properly, it goes back to the breath. And if you want to exercise properly, it goes back to the breath. So all the other things that you're trying to do for your health are not going to be the best for you if you're not breathing properly. One of the best examples is people who breathe through their mouth while they're eating. I mean, you're not able to chew your food properly. Digestion's not going to take place in the same way. You're not going to move towards the parasympathetic nervous system. And I don't know if you would agree with that part too, but I would love to hear about the relationship between skull changes and really looking at how this is not, if in the grand scheme of things, millions of years, this is a more recent occurrence of us being able to not breathe properly. And I would say automatically. So typically before we wouldn't have to think about our breathing, I don't think.
Well, about eating, we all eat too. And a lot of us eat garbage food. A lot of us eat good food. So it's not just whether or not you're eating, it's what you're eating. And breathing ties right into that. So we're all breathing, but how are we breathing? And just as you mentioned, there's mouth breathing while eating, there's mouth breathing while exercising, there's mouth breathing while sleeping, while studying, while watching TV. And all of these things have a downstream effect on your health. And this is no mystery to the people who study this. There's 50, 60 years of real science showing the problems that can occur, even developmental problems in the brain, in the body, skeletal developmental problems when you're constantly choking on yourself at night, flooding your body with cortisol. You're not going to grow as well as you could otherwise. And they've seen this numerous times. So again, it's not a mystery, but no one's really talking about it. And I thought that that was so bizarre. And another thing I don't think a lot of people are talking about is that humans as a species are completely messed up. Our ability to breathe has been severely impacted over the last 300 years because our mouths have changed, because our faces have changed, and that's changed our airways. It's changed our ability to breathe. And if you don't believe me, you can just do what I did when I spent several months doing, looking at ancient skulls and comparing them to modern skulls. And we almost look like a different species right now. Our mouths are so small that our teeth no longer fit, so they grow in crooked. Guess what the other problem is with having a mouth that's too small for your face? It means you have a smaller airway. It's harder to get air in and out. It can clog your nose. It can make you more apt to have chronic sinusitis or other obstruction issues in your nose, which means you're breathing through your mouth, which means you're having all those other downstream problems. So what I thought was so fascinating about all of this was that I had always learned that evolution meant progress. Right? So we're supposed to be getting stronger and faster and better with every new generation. It's completely false. In a lot of ways, humans have taken a huge hit, especially in the last 50 years, with our health, with our development. I mean, if you don't believe me, go look at all of the chronic diseases out right now. Go look at the average BMI throughout the U.S. and other countries, and the proof's all over the place.
Without a doubt, and there's this huge tie for processed food and our not using our jaws when we are younger in the same degree to build up that musculature. But I don't know that there's a good tie yet. But I do believe that there is some now inherited issues from generation to generation. I think Weston Price did hint at that in his, seminal book 20 years ago or so. I remember reading Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And what he looked at was, the grandparents, the parents, and then the children, where they started to get more into process-based food. And as you state in your book, every single, I don't know how many there were, but every single species has perfect teeth. You look at your dog, you look at any primate, and they have a beautiful smile and beautiful teeth in their own right. They don't have multiple rows of teeth if we're talking about, humans or primates. And that is something recent, maybe 10,000 years ago or so? Is that when we first started to see issues with the narrowing of the jaw and the space of teeth?
We started seeing crooked teeth about 200, 300 years ago. 10,000 years ago, we were perfect. And you can see this. You can look at an ancient skull from 10,000 years ago, and it's going to have straight teeth. So Janet Monge at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania, which has one of the largest collections of pre-industrial skulls in the world, said, "I have never seen a hunter-gatherer with crooked teeth. Not one of them." This is what she does all day. She looks at skulls. Yeah. So thousands and thousands of them. So it wasn't until industrialized food that we had crooked teeth. And people have such a hard time getting their head around this. But just one point that you made, and this is where it gets really scary, is this is now becoming a heritable trait. We can see a too small mouth. We can see this retrognathic profile in the womb. Fetuses now have this. So why does that occur? It probably is tied to the mother's inability to breathe properly. It's also tied to, I was just talking to Dr. Kevin Boyd about this, gestational apnea. So if the mother is not having enough oxygen flowing through her body, if she's stressed out and there's cortisol, there can be developmental problems with the fetus. So it's scary seeing these. I was just looking at sonograms yesterday, through about a dozen sonograms yesterday, and the fetal skull compared to an ancient skull is drastically different now. So we're kind of hosed right out of the gate. That doesn't mean we can't create a lot of change and benefits to our breathing. That's not what I'm saying. It's about becoming aware of our poor breathing, aware of our poor skeleture, and then finding ways to fix that.
And I think that's a key point because I was born with a longer face. I was born with a deviated septum, smaller nasal passages. I wish I had those wider nasal passages that I could take more oxygen in, that I could, breathe in a better way, especially I think at night. So that's has always been my issue is I can be conscious during the day, and then it's also sleeping position because that actually matters as well for being able to intake oxygen. But that's a third of your life. And if you're breathing in properly overnight, whether it's sleep apnea or, sleep apnea is a difficult one because there's one apnea, two apneas a night, and then there's 40, 50, so it's people are in varying degrees of sleep apnea. But what I'm trying to teach people is that you can be more conscious of it. When I do cardio now and exercise, not necessarily resistance-wise, but cardio-wise, I'm malt taping, and I'm just purposely nasal breathing to the point where I had to go back and basically relearn how to do my cardio. I had to start at a much slower pace, get my body used to that CO2 buildup that I want to get to in a few minutes. And that was challenging. That was actually painful and difficult. And for our children, it's crucial as well because my oldest daughter, because of her smaller palate, smaller jaw, she was eating healthy food from when she was born. I knew how to feed my children 8 years ago when she was born, but that didn't stop necessarily a genetic component. And now, by educating her, she is actually doing malt taping at night. And I didn't feel comfortable malt taping my daughter at 7 years old, but they have malt tape of varying degrees that you can put around the lips instead of over the lips, and they can breathe if they need to. So it was by shrinking her tonsils naturally, because they started to swell on their own through improper mouth breathing, and then being able to do the malt taping, things are slowly but surely going in the right direction in terms of her teeth, because when her adult teeth started to come in, they came in crooked, and we're saying, well, she's eating well, she's exercising, she's a healthy kid. Oh, there's this mouth breathing at night.
For sure. And oral posture, as mark my words, in the next few years, this is going to be very big stuff, especially for kids when you're developing so quickly. If you're walking around with your mouth open, how is your face going to grow? If that's what you're doing all night and through much of the day. And they know that this is so well known that it's called adenoid face, from when the adenoids get inflamed or when the tonsils get inflamed and you start having to breathe through your mouth. You actually develop this very long face, right? And this is I would say the majority of people have this now. And we know this from measurements of ancient skulls versus modern skulls. But it's an important thing to mention when you're talking about sleeping and breathing. The only way you're going to be able to sleep well is if you're breathing well. So these people who are doing all of these other sleeping pills, I'm not sleeping well. I need to, have all these other interventions. You have to fix your breathing first. And that especially goes for kids. And what Dr. Christian Guilleminault at Stanford studied this stuff for 50 years, over 50 years, found that you don't even need to be suffering from snoring or sleep apnea to have developmental problems from improper breathing. You just need some resistance in your throat. It's called upper airway resistance syndrome. So even if you don't hear your kids snoring, if they have some sort of trouble breathing, if their breathing is labored, breathing is something you're going to be doing 20,000 to 25,000 times a day. And if you're doing that improperly, it is going to affect you. So I just wanted to make that note about sleeping because this blew me away as well. People are looking at AHI, but you just need to look at the fluidity and how easily it is for people to breathe, and then correlate that to their health and to sleeping fitness.
And although I can't prove it yet, I'm pretty convinced that the tonsils and adenoids will swell with mouth breathing and not necessarily just vice versa. And the reason is, my hypothesis is, when you mouth breathe, you're actually building up more anaerobic bacteria. And that's why there's far more dental-based issues with mouth breathing because the bacteria changes in your mouth. Like, basically, you have the gut bacteria, and that needs to stay balanced. Well, so does the oral-based bacteria. And the more anaerobes that you have in your mouth, the more likely you are to get cavities. I mean, nobody was brushing their teeth 10,000 plus years ago. In Ayurveda, they were maybe using some neem, and that's about it. But when we look at it, they still had perfect teeth. They had great teeth, no dental caries, anything like that. So yes, the food matters, but I think it goes back to, as well, keeping the mouth closed and shut while breathing, and I should say while sleeping as well.
Yeah, there's many factors here. So it does matter what you eat. Of course it does. But when you're opening your mouth becomes more acidic and it becomes a hotbed for cavities. Any dentist knows this. And Dr. Mark Burhenny believes, from being in this field for 30 years, he is convinced the number one cause of cavities, even over sugar consumption, the number one cause is mouth breathing. And what's interesting is dentists were saying this 100 years ago. They were saying the exact same thing. And if you look at the biology of what is happening, it makes perfect sense. A more acidic environment, you're messing up the pH in your mouth, it's going to be more apt to have cavities and other problems. So again, not saying closing your mouth is going to cure all your problems, but mouth breathing is contributing to so many issues in health right now. And so few people, I think, are really clued into this.
Yeah, I mean, I use in my practice something called the de-stress protocol, and it's diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest, emotional balance, supplement protocols, and mindset. When I look at that, half of those are related to breathing. Like, the majority, you can't rest, relax, control your emotions, be able to even get in the proper mindset if you're suffering from irritability, anxiety, overwhelm, low mood, and you will be in a lower mood or depressed if your body lacks oxygen. So I really want to get to the point across to people is there's no panacea, there's no cure-all at all with health, but there are fundamentals, and that is food and sleep and oxygen. Like, these things really do matter. So if you're looking for like the latest and greatest, I always go back and pick on ubiquinol or CoQ10. Like, sure, it can be great for your mitochondria and your heart, but you don't supersede breathing. You don't supersede the nutrition that's going in your body. I think you quoted something like 30 gallons a day. It's a great way to look at it. Basically, you're eating oxygen, 30 gallons a day or so you're putting in your body of was it oxygen or breathing? Refresh my memory on that.
We take 30 pounds of air in and out of our bodies every single day. So far more than we eat, far more than we drink. And if you think that the way in which you take in that air and exhale it isn't going to affect your health, you're absolutely nuts. And again, we've known this, cultures have known this for thousands and thousands of years, and we've had the science behind this stuff for decades and decades.
So we know that, let's say someone's suffering from any chronic-based disease. I mean, if you're looking at an autoimmune issue or you're dealing with some type of inflammatory-based syndrome, high blood pressure is a great example. Like you know that you need to look into your breath because those are exacerbated by inflammation and cortisol and tension on the body. And we know that we can release all of that going back to our breath, and there are specific styles of breath. But let's say that someone doesn't have necessarily a diagnosed disease, and again, we're not providing medical treatment or protocols here. We're simply talking about how oxygen, CO2, and breathing affect the nervous system and every other function within the body. But what would be a test that someone could try that they could say, well, because people don't know whether some people should know, and I think they do if they're mouth breathing while they sleep, but what is a good test to see if your body is doing well and has good balance between CO2 and oxygen? And I guess we should explain CO2 first and why you refer to it as one of the chief hormones in the body.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are just focused entirely on oxygen in the body, and oxygen is obviously important, especially in the age of COVID. You don't want to see your blood sats go down. So oxygen is so important, but oxygen can only do what it can do in your bodies with the proper levels of CO2. And CO2 has been getting this very bad rap, rightly so, because there's too much CO2 in the atmosphere. It's making the oceans more acidic. All these things are true. You can say otherwise, but you're wrong because that's what the science has clearly shown us. But we need a balance of CO2 and oxygen in our bodies. So the only way that oxygen is going to detach efficiently and go to all of our muscles and organs and tissues is in the presence of CO2. And when you are over-breathing, when you're breathing beyond your metabolic needs, you are off-gassing too much CO2. So your CO2 goes low. So you can do this right now. You can breathe 20 big breaths. You might feel some dizziness in your head. You might even feel some tingling in your fingers and your toes after a while. Those areas, the extremities, might get a little cold. That's not from an increase of oxygen to those areas, but a decrease of circulation. So CO2 has this huge role as a vasodilator. So this is what helps dilate blood vessels to allow that fresh oxygen in red blood cells to get to where they're going. So the best way of doing this is to balance those levels is to breathe more slowly, to ultimately breathe within your metabolic needs. And people are like, well, what is that? How do I do that throughout the day? It's really hard to know exactly what your body needs. But it starts with breathing through the nose, which causes you to breathe more slowly, pressurizes that air, allows you to get more oxygen in. And once you start with that, you can really notice the difference. Sometimes you'll feel your fingers start to warm up. You'll feel warmer because there's more blood throughout your body that way. So to address your question, a quick test that people have been using for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, is they would just have someone calmly exhale and hold their breath. And populations who have asthma, who have anxiety, who are susceptible to panic attacks, who have other fear-based disorders or respiratory problems, can hold their breath traditionally maybe 5 to 10 seconds. They hold their breath and they go, and they hate it because their tolerance for CO2 is so low because they've been breathing too much for so long. So the key to allowing these people to tolerate more CO2, get more circulation to help take control of these issues that they have, is to train them very gently to hold their breath, to slow their breathing down. This is what Buteyko method does. This is what Papworth method does. This is what pranayama does. This is what qigong does, on and on and on. They've been doing the same thing for thousands of years.
Yeah, and I was surprised by this myself because I mean, my background, we haven't spoken before, but my background is coming from Addison's disease and fibromyalgia and POTS and autoimmune-based issues. And I suffered with that for about 10 years. From 17 years old to 27 years old, I was a medical nightmare going from specialist to specialist. And then I found out about functional medicine and integrative health. And as they say, the rest is history. So all those things have been healed today. But I started working with Dr. Jay Wiles, who I think that you know. And I did that actually for HRV because I'm always looking to better my best. And I mean, I feel great. I have great energy, all those different things. But my breath hold was actually pretty poor. And I did it through holding my breath and then basically taking steps, walking. And for me, I could barely make it to 20. I mean, like really barely make it to 20, and I was shocked. And I'm pretty sure it was from over breathing or really irregular breathing just for years. Like sometimes I would overbreathe and sometimes I would hold my breath, and there was just no rhythm to it, no flow to it. And so I've started to actually see that gradually improve. Part of that I'll notice with a lot of my multi-taping and my trail runs, that in the beginning, it's not good. And then my body adjusts very quickly within about 5 to 7 minutes to that CO2, those chemoreceptors. And they're like, oh, okay, this is how it's going to be. And they actually adjusted really quick. I don't know if you have any experience with that because you have a lot of case studies now. But for me, this is kind of one of those last things I'll be working on is really that chemoreceptivity to carbon dioxide in my blood. It's never been my strong suit.
So Dr. Justin Feinstein, I was just talking to him a couple of days ago as well, and I worked with him on a chapter in the book. He believes, and this is just theoretical stuff, okay? This hasn't been proven, but he believes that anxiety has a physical component. There's a physical, it's not just you're overthinking too much. It's not just mental. There is some disruption in the circuitry. So physical disruption. And he believes that is tied to breathing, which is why so many of these people, he works with people with bulimia and anorexia and PTSD. They can't hold their breath. And whenever they're forced to hold their breath, they completely freak out. So right now, if you were to take a breath in to about a count of 3 and then exhale to about 8 or whatever is comfortable, you're going to feel your heart rate get slower and slower and slower on those exhales. So that is how we can tap into our nervous system when we're breathing. And so many people are so wound up that they have a hard time. They can inhale as much as they want, just packing air. But whenever it's time to make a calm exhale, they start to lose it. So this is that connection between breathing and the nervous system. And you notice right when you switch your breathing, if you're able to extend those exhales, you watch your heart rate variability just go off the charts. All of those waves that were once very dysfunctional and crossed and crazy become these gorgeous sine waves because your body is like, oh my God, this is how it wants to function. It wants to function in an efficient state where it's using less energy to do more. And this is exactly what breathing allows you to do. So some people, I've talked to super fit dudes who work out every day and they've got huge muscles and all that, still can't hold their breath because they're way too high strung. But once you get them over that hurdle to do it, I've seen, and this is anecdotal to be clear, they start sleeping better. They're able to take control of their emotions a lot better. They're able to think more clearly. And of course that makes sense because you're shifting your body to a parasympathetic state. It's not all fight or flight. It's not all about attacking things and being really aggressive. So, this sounds a little woo-woo, I understand. All I would suggest people do, if you don't believe me, put a heart rate variability sensor on you, put a pulse ox on you, even take your blood pressure before and after trying some easy breathing with a longer exhale and tell me what you find. And this isn't some voodoo magic. This is a physiological process that's happening in your body that is controlled by breathing.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about fringe-based anecdotal evidence as well in the show, with always the caveat that some of it might be anecdotal. But the truth is, all of this is backed up by hard science when we can just make the correlation to we are shifting from the sympathetic nervous system into the parasympathetic nervous system, where we know that the two systems have different processes, meaning like literally you don't control the dilation of your pupils, your sympathetic or parasympathetic or light and dark do that. So this is without a doubt a real thing. I have one other theory, because I completely agree with you about the anxiety, the overwhelm, the past trauma, and I'd love to talk with you about that in just one moment as well, because I think there is something there. But I also believe there might be one more element, and that is subtle variations in pH in the blood. So we know that the pH of the blood needs to maintain about a 7.356, like right there. And we know that, yes, if we drink a Coca-Cola, which is like a pH of 3, our blood's not going to drop down to a 3. We have buffers within our body to make sure that our blood stays perfectly buffered. But I believe there's tissue variations as well. So we can have blood variations of up to a 7.5 and about down to a 7.2, although rare to go that high or that low. But then we're also talking about the tissues and the acidity and anaerobic nature of tissues, and really working in more of a lactic acid fermentation versus oxygen. So I think there's one more component. I don't know if you've studied or looked into this part, but I believe there's a lot of people, myself included, where I was on 3,000 capsules of amoxicillin during my childhood, destroyed my mitochondria, destroyed my gut function, and it is rebuilding the process of how your body literally functions with or without oxygen. So love to hear if you looked into that, or if that's just me way off on a tangent.
I think this is fascinating to me, because it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and not too much of this made it into the book. But I'm convinced that these pranayamas, which have been around for thousands of years, which is the exact same thing as Wim Hof method, if you know him and know his breathing, which is the exact same thing as Qigong, which is the exact same thing as other breathing practices. What do they have you do? I'm not talking about the slow, focus on your breath, let's be calm. I'm talking about the vigorous pranayamas. They have you hold, and now breathe very slowly. So when you're doing that, you are shifting your pH very powerfully from an alkaline state to an acidic state, and back and forth again. So you're offloading CO2, and then you're building more CO2. So you're creating more oxygen in your body, and then that oxygen has someplace to go, because there's CO2. It can offload. I was at UCSF. This didn't make it into the book, at the hypoxia lab, and I did a Sudarshan Kriya practice, and they had catheters out. They were taking blood every 5 minutes. I mean, the whole thing on a gurney. And these people were so completely out. And I'm not like a breathing pro. I just did a practice. But it was so divorced from what they're used to seeing. My pH went up to about 7.69. And this is like emergency room. Yes. This person's dying, And then it went, I think it went down to about 7.73 or 7.228. But you can just, when you are in control and you're doing this consciously, it's very different than going into an ER and saying, my pH, I'm so alkaline, I'm about to die. And that's what they weren't used to seeing. I said, I feel great because I'm doing this consciously. And so I believe, and again, this is hypothetical, just as you were saying, and I wish more people would study this, by having this flexibility in your pH, by doing this consciously, you can help remove more toxins, you can move more lymph fluid, you can move more blood, you can get oxygen into more areas of the body that would otherwise not be getting it. And you look at Wim Hof, 45 minutes after he's done his practice, he's consuming something like twice the amount of oxygen he would otherwise. And that's the magic of turning this stuff on and off and on and off again.
Yeah, it's a powerful area of study, and I always look at balance in the body. So my job is to always understand that there's there's a perfect place for all of us to meet. And really the only reason why we are sick and unwell is that there's some imbalance within the body. And typically there's multiple, because like you said, our body compensates, right? So you start to eat more acidic based food, and it's okay, your body's just going to buffer it with more alkaline based minerals. Then your kidney function is going to have to change as well. That's why I think there's a kidney component to the pH, but I'll save that for another time. But when we look at, again, going back to the basics, I think that it's so crucial. We're going to say something about the kidneys. Did you happen to look into that?
Yeah,
well?
Of course. There is an absolute kidney component to this. If you are over breathing all the time, your body is going to compensate. It's going to keep your pH at 7.36 or around 7.4, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to do that because if your body isn't at that pH, nothing's going to work. So that's when all of the magic happens. So your body's going to start offloading bicarb. And when it starts offloading bicarb, it's going to take magnesium, phosphate, it's going to take essential minerals away from you, which makes for more vasoconstriction and other problems down the line. So again, the body is it's so good at keeping us alive, but alive is not healthy. And I think that's the big message here.
And that's really when I studied bioregulatory medicine. This is big in Europe, not so much in the US. There are fundamentals. There are homeostatic, basically, balances within the body that keep us where we need to be. And the body's just great at compensating. That's the truth. But when you look at that and you say, okay, well, if the body's offloading magnesium, if the body's becoming more catabolic, losing more potassium, well, that's a recipe for disaster with high blood pressure, right? Hypertension is oftentimes an imbalance between, people like to say it's from taking in too much sodium, but really it's an imbalance between sodium, potassium, sodium, magnesium. So, and our kidneys help to balance that. And so does a hormone called aldosterone. And if you can't breathe well and you have more anxiety and you're producing more cortisol, you're in fight or flight, well, you're going to produce more aldosterone and you're going to be depleting your body of potassium. So there's a downhill effect to all of these things. And that's simply why I also want, when we have great guests like yourself on the show, I want people to understand that it's about foundational based practices and it's about fundamentals. And if you don't start there, you can get to all the fun biohacking things in the future. But if you don't start with the foundation, those things don't really matter.
I couldn't agree with you more. And this is why in the center of the book, each chapter has this very quick title. So slow, nose, exhale, chew. Because that foundation, it doesn't matter if you're an asthmatic or you're an insomniac, or you're an ultramarathoner, we will all benefit from this foundation of health. Then you can get weird and optimize it for whatever avenue you want to go down. But it has to start with this foundation. And this is my argument for breathing. I think the word is out now. Yeah, what you eat affects your health, okay? It does. How much you exercise affects your health. How you sleep affects your health. But breathing just seems to be this outlier, or it has been for so long, but it is at the core of all of these things and how you do them well. And it's the core of how you function every single day. And the most exciting thing to me about it is something you can immediately take control of. And once you take control of it, you can watch it change your body.
It's typically the simpler things too. That's why not as many people grab onto these things. They're just not as exciting, meaning so I could pretty much remove myself from all of the top 3 causes of mortality and potentially cancer by eating 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. That seems too easy. You mean I can have more energy, less anxiety, better mood, more energy, all of these different things if I just work on my breathing? Well, there's got to be a trick to this. And that's the big issue that we're dealing with. But I would love to make it more complicated, but the truth is that is not what is going to help the great majority of people. And yes, we can work on the nitty gritty after that, but you have to be willing to do those things first and almost the mundane. I would say in order to reach the levels of saying, oh, okay, now I'm going to really practice biofeedback and all these great things. I'm a huge advocate of that simple leaf-based device. I don't know if you've used it before, but I've talked about it with Dr. Jay Wiles and Patrick McKeown, that you can do biofeedback in real time with a haptic-based device that's basically an ECG that you're wearing around with you. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. For a couple $100, And you'll be able to see those sine waves like you're just talking about actually come back into balance with 3 minutes of practice.
Well, nature is simple yet subtle. That's what Albert Georgi said. He won the Nobel Prize for his work in vitamin C. And this stuff isn't very glamorous. When I was first writing a book about breath, I talked to my other friends who are journalists. They're like, "You're writing a book about breathing? Dude, that sounds so boring." And then I started telling them, I said, actually, I'm researching this woman who breathed in ways to straighten her scoliotic spine. And here are these people using it to overcome autoimmune diseases. And then they got it. But something my father-in-law is a pulmonologist and my brother-in-law is an ER doctor. So this is a Western medicine family, and I'm a huge fan of Western medicine. So this is not an East versus West. I wouldn't be alive without Western medicine. It serves such an amazing function. But what they told me, these are their words, not mine. They're like, well, of course we're not hearing about breathing because there's no way to make money on it. People are going to try. They're going to, make little plastic doodads, whatever. And some of that stuff works great. But it's really hard to make money on it, just like with telling people to go to the farmer's market and not go to Safeway and buy a bunch of canned foods. Like, we've known processed foods were bad for us for over 100 years. We've known this. Only recently have we taken up, really going back to whole foods. So I think that these simple things are going to be coming back because we've seen the holes in modern technologies. We've seen the holes in trying to do these workarounds, these little hacks. It's like, you don't have to breathe well. You just need to, pop this pill once a day. Sometimes you got to put in the work, and breathing just doesn't require you to change your lifestyle too much because we carry it around with us all day and we can adjust it no matter what we're doing and see benefits.
And I would say it goes back to self-awareness. I just want to talk about, so I know we've been kind of bouncing back and forth, but James Nestor's latest book is Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art, which I love because you go back and forth really through Ayurvedic-based foundations, through yogic-based medicine or yogic-based breathing. And it took me back to, I was doing an internship actually in Sri Lanka, and this is actually for a naturopathic doctoral degree, but I wanted to learn a lot of these lost things as well. I've always looked at myself as more like an archaeologist and teacher rather than a doctor. Is like I wanted to learn people. We like to say, well, the average life expectancy was 30-something years old. It's true, but there were also people living into their 80s, 90s, and hundreds of years ago as well. So what was the difference? Like, what did they know maybe that we didn't? Of course, we should all be thankful for modern medicine because many of us wouldn't have survived things like like typhoid or random things like that, or even getting a parasite. So like these things do matter. But I mean, I would even say, and I would be remiss if I didn't state, but like there were also remedies for parasites with all sorts of different herbs, et cetera, back then as well. But regardless, what did they know? And I went over there and I've taken yoga many, many times, but we started doing lion's breathing and dog. And I'm like, what's going on here? By the end of it, I was so lightheaded and dizzy and almost euphoric that I had never experienced that. And I just said, what did we just do there? But I wasn't able to have the conversation because the fluency between their language and mine was not there. But that was my first taste of understanding I'm just breathing differently and I feel completely different. And I know you've had a few of those same experiences as well.
For sure. And what's great about all this stuff is it can be measured, and so many people have measured it. Mm-hmm. They've looked at what these different breathing practices will do to your body in the short term, and then they've measured what happens in the long term. If you look at all the science going into Wim Hof method, I mean, I know Wim. I've talked with him many times. He's an amazing dude. He calls it Wim Hof method, but he's the first to admit, he's like, this stuff has been around for thousands. He didn't invent anything. He didn't invent cold exposure. Look at all of the cultures that use cold exposure. So, what he had said and what he had found was that these simple hacks, these very basic things that you can do he's into exposing the body to stress, hormetic stress, hormesis, which we know has a hugely beneficial effect on people with autoimmune problems, okay? But that's being studied right 4 blocks from my house at UCSF. Alyssa Eppel is now studying this with rheumatoid arthritis. So I think that we just had different names for these things in the past. And those names got associated with like crystals and Buddha statues and people who weren't looking at the science of it. Because a lot of their names are these things no Westerner can pronounce anyway. But it is interesting when you go back through the history and you look at these practices, you're like, they've all just been doing the same thing in these different cultures. Even though these cultures probably weren't even in contact with one another, they developed these same methods of health. And we can still use those same methods because we're still the same species and our bodies work the same way. One thing I wanted to mention about lifespan is I heard the same thing. It's like, well, if we were so healthy back then, why did we all die when we were 30? So there's a difference between life expectancy and lifespan. Life expectancy is I have 2 kids. One dies at birth, the other lives to be 80. Okay, life expectancy is now 40. So that doesn't mean we can't live till 80. If you look at Greek philosophers, which I was just doing this a couple weeks ago, these dudes were living into their 70s and 80s all the time. So our ability to live to our 80s and be healthy hasn't really changed in the past few thousand years. And the people who've studied this have shown that. It's just, less kids in birth have been dying. But then again, you really got me on my soapbox now. A lot of those calculations we're looking at Victorian age births when everyone was dying of everything because everything was so polluted. So anyway,
no, that's
topic for another conversation. Yeah.
Well, you're 100% true, though. And I try to tell people that, like, well, we don't really know if cancer was as bad in the 1800s because nobody lived that long. And I'm like, that's not true. Because of literally sanitation, the life expectancy would get longer because there wasn't as much death with childbirth. And that was the big thing with not only the children, but the mothers as well. So, that's why we really have to take a look at that, meaning that humans are necessarily living longer. I think we're keeping people alive longer through modern medicine, that's for sure. But the health of the life, I don't necessarily know is there either.
And if you look at Native American cultures, and this is, you can look at the work of George Catlin and other anthropologists who have worked out in these areas, women were not losing, 5 out of 6 of their kids in these cultures. They would have 2 kids 4 years apart, and they can't find fetal skulls. They can't find fetal skeletons because the incidences of death at childbirth were so much lower. So again, our calculations, just like our calculations for different vitamins, they're from the 30s when we were just looking at how much vitamin C do we need not to get scurvy?
Right.
We weren't looking at how much C we need to be healthy. So I think that the further back you go in time, and the further people were divorced from these cities that were extremely polluted, where there was cholera, where there was no system of health, a lot more kids are going to be dying in environments like that. But it just wasn't the same for other cultures.
100%. The people were not living in accord with nature. They just were not following those practices. The further we get away from nature itself, and I'm not saying we need to go outside and, live outside, but there is something to that. It's getting back into rhythm with the sun rising and sun setting, with understanding that our devices, although great, there's a time and place, and looking at blue light. And a lot of people that are listening to podcasts are more into biohacking and technology, and I totally get that. I love it myself. Again, there's a time and place. But what I also like to do is, because everyone says, well, this isn't affecting me. Now you can actually use this technology to see how it is, though. So with a lot of people in our practice, we'll say, okay, get some type of biometric-based device that's going to look at your sleep. And we'll see, okay, you don't think alcohol is affecting you. Let's go 1 week without drinking alcohol, and then let's put it back in. And we see people's HRV plummet. We see their REM sleep go down. We see their deep sleep go down. And then we look at it as, okay, well, this is what's happening when you decide to drink. Now, is it 3 drinks, that's the issue. What if you just do 1 and we can look at the different hermetic stressors, as you said before, as to what it does in the body? Because we know too much sleep, too much exercise, too much even oxygen raises what's called reactive oxygen species in the body, free radical damage, creating inflammation. So, but that's different for each person. That's the interesting thing. So we can actually use some of these devices to really dial it in for each person while understanding that there is still a foundational level to all of this. All humans need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, some 7.5, some 8.5. Where do you need it? And also it could change on the day.
I completely agree. And, this is what Indian Ayurvedic diets were prescribing too. They're like, not everyone should be eating the same kinds of foods because we have different constitutions. Mm-hmm. But instead, in the Western world is very into blanket prescriptions. They're like, we're just going to have everyone use this one thing and it works for 70% of the people, and that's pretty good. Well, what about the other 30% that it's not working for? This is complicated stuff because I'm not bad-mouthing Western science. Again, a huge, huge fan of Western medicine and the scientific protocols and randomized controlled studies. But there are other things. If you're a real scientist, you have to consider that anything should be measured. Okay, if anything can be measured, we can learn whether or not it works. And I've seen some very closed-mindedness in that world to some of these other things that we're talking about. You're like, what's the controversy? If you can measure it, you can prove if it works or not. Oh, I don't measure that. I don't study that stuff, And so that's what's so interesting about your work is you're seeing it in the real world as a clinician. You're seeing it how it affects people every day, and you can draw a lot of conclusions from that as well. Get more data.
Well, for me, a big part of it was coming into this with a skeptic's eye. I mean, I saw the best of the best in Boston, Massachusetts for medical specialists for all the issues I was dealing with. And then even when it was diagnosed as all these different autoimmune issues and Addison's disease, it was still only treated with pharmaceuticals. And again, there's a time and place for sure. An acute-based disease is in someone comes in with high blood pressure of 200 over 120, get them on some beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, whatever you need right away. But then maybe let's look for what that underlying root cause may be. And I know that's not even for everyone, but I took my skepticism even into studying a lot of natural health modalities because I still studied it from a scientific method. And so when I was my goal when I went overseas was to say, I'm going to study all these different forms of medicine, and I'm going to choose the one that actually works with real people. And what I found was they all worked, surprisingly, but they didn't all work all the time. And you had to know who to apply which method with for what person. And that's the issue I see with the keto diet, carnivore diet, every different diet out there, is they just forget about all the people it doesn't work for. And they say, well, they're just not doing it correctly. And we just don't realize that things work for certain people for certain reasons because of those they're helping to correct the imbalances, but they actually may not even work over the long term. They get really great results up front, but not necessarily over that long term. And that's sometimes how I feel about the Western-based philosophy and mindset. And that's why I want to bring this full circle now, because you saw some really horrific things with freediving, and then you saw the best of freediving in the East, when it was more of a meditative practice or just going into the ocean as one with the ocean. And that is the difference. It's not even about conventional medicine. I love conventional medicine. I don't love the Western mindset around medicine. I love the Eastern mindset, but I love being able to put it through the Western-based scientific method. So if you could talk a little bit about how we can take even breathing too far and all of these things too far through a Western-based philosophy, I think that would be a great thing to bring full circle.
For sure. As Westerners, we just want to push the throttle on everything, right? And, so that's why we're climbing the highest mountains, and that's why we're diving the deepest and all that. And that's all fine and great. But what you keep saying, and that it really goes back to, is this foundation of health and this balance within the body. If people want to compete and free dive to see how deep they can go down, and maybe they won't come back to the surface, maybe they'll go unconscious 30 feet underwater. I saw that. Maybe they'll come up to the surface dead for 2 minutes until they're resuscitated, then kind of laugh and move on. People want to do that. That's cool. I don't want to see it. And that's not the sort of freediving that I want to focus on at all. And the biggest, I would say, difference between these two viewpoints is when I went to Japan, when I met the AMA divers, again, these are women in their 70s and 80s, and they said the ocean will always provide, if you just carry from the ocean what one person can carry. So they go out every single day. They've been doing this since they were 15 years old, every single day. And these are some of the strongest women I've ever seen in my life. They go down there, they grab their food, and they come back. They said, if you take more than you can carry, then there is an imbalance in the ocean. So you think about the Western approach to gathering seafood, right? Huge boats, huge nets, take as much as you possibly can. So I think that is related to views of health, too. My friend Brian McKenzie, who is an elite trainer, mentioned a quote I thought was great. He said, Eastern medicine is great if you want to live. Western medicine is great if you don't want to die. So I think, to me, that really sums up what's going on here. They're both very beneficial, but they also have limitations. And it's by looking at both of those and finding the best parts of them that I think we can really move this stuff forward.
Yeah, that's a great quote as well. I've been looking actually to connect with Brian. I'm going to have to after this conversation. He does obviously a lot with fitness and breath work and all of that. It's really nice between combining the two. One thing I'd like to, and I want to provide a little bit of nuts and bolts information here. Of course, people should go out. They should absolutely read. Not only, I mean, this is a great book in terms of learning all of the, as you put it, the lost art, or I should say the new science of a lost art, but it's great stories in here as well. I mean, there's just so much depth to this book within 200 pages or so, 250 pages. So this is a book well worth reading. And it is the book right now out there on it because it's pulling together the Buteyko breathing. It's pulling together some heart rate variability. It's looking at different things with nutrition. So I think it's doing right by what has come before. And you're basically pulling that all together, which you should obviously as a great journalist. So let's talk now, because there's different forms of breathing. So should I be doing Wim Hof? Should I be doing box breathing? Should I be doing Buteyko breathing? Should I just hold my breath and then breathe again? Like, what people are lost as to know what to do, and everyone has their own philosophy. So I'd love to hear from you what you've kind of settled in on, especially after having written the book now for some time.
So I was equally as lost, which is what really propelled me to want to write this book. You open up books on pranayama, there's 400 different breathing techniques with these crazy names you can't understand. I was like, cool, where do I start? What do I do? So it goes back to that foundation, right? So I would start by doing these basic things. We could get all into the weeds of why you want to do these things, but it's in the book, and we've talked a bit about this already. Breathe through your nose. And if you can't breathe through your nose, you need to figure out a way to breathe through your nose. Dr. Jayakar Nayak down at Stanford, he's the chief of rhinology research, told me, if a sink is clogged in your house, you're going to find a way of clearing it. The nose has to be considered the same thing. It is vastly different for your body processing air through your mouth or through your nose. So breathe through your nose. Breathe slowly and breathe deeply. So breathing is not only a biochemical process, it is biomechanical. There is this big muscle underneath your lungs that goes up and down every time you breathe. That's the diaphragm. And by engaging the diaphragm more, by moving it more, we can massage our organs and help purge more lymph fluid out of our bodies. The diaphragm is a pump. And some researchers told me that the heart is a secondary pump. The diaphragm's the main pump. So you have to be engaging the diaphragm. Another thing I would say is to breathe less. Most of us are breathing far over our metabolic needs. And by breathing less, we will actually get more oxygen. This is so counterintuitive. I won't get into the details of this, but we've known this for 120 years. And you look around and everyone is... And now, as far as what breathing is right for you, so start with that foundation. Everyone's going to benefit from that foundation. And then it depends where you want to go with this. The last third of the book is called Breathing Plus, because it's looking at, for people who have severe anxiety, severe asthma, what's the special breathing practice that has been shown to be beneficial? What does the science say? What about autoimmune issues? Even diabetes. Is there a certain way of breathing for diabetes? Yes, there is. That has been shown to be beneficial to help regulate blood sugar and insulin. So I am not going to give a prescription for people with any of these things. Start with the foundation. I think that so much of the work comes with building those good habits. You will see some huge benefits. I've seen people absolutely transformed by just adopting the simplest breathing habits. Then you can take it to where you want to go.
Without a doubt. And in the book, you talk about, so for people, kind of thinking about this too, page 219 of the book is really a great summary going back to these are the different forms of breathing. Now you should know the why behind that. Of course, read the whole book because it's sometimes dangerous just to get the summary, that's for sure. But what you want to do is just start, and I believe you quoted it at like 5.5 breaths per minute or so. And so if we just look at it as simplest terms, breathe in for about 5 seconds, breathe out for about 5 seconds, that's going to be 6 breaths per minute. It's just a simple way to start to acclimate yourself to this, and then you can try the box breathing, which I think is fantastic for a lot of people, just because there's actually that partial breath hold in there, and that might help with some of that those chemoreceptors as well. But there's alternate nostril breathing for those people that might have a deviated septum or dealing with the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system that we didn't even get to really get into with alternate nostril breathing. There's so much to talk about. So that is in this book. I can't recommend it enough. Again, it's Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art by James Nestor. We will link this up in the show notes today. I'm also going to link up a few other talks that you've done before. I think you did a great talk one of the first ones that I heard you at a float-based convention. That was an amazing one. I'm like, okay, this was a 15-minute video on like 20 different things that were all like boom, boom, boom. And it gave you a little bit of a taste of all of this. So this is a field that I believe is going to grow just like nutrition has grown over the past 20 years. And so I'm excited to be able to present some of this work and the work that you've done. Any parting words for our community?
I would just repeat something I said before. Nature is simple yet subtle. Breathing in about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. It seems so simple, like it's not going to do anything. This has been studied for 20 years, and it can have really a massive benefit to you. And the best part is it's free. So why not try it?
Amazing. James, it was a pleasure having you on today. Great getting to speak with you on this topic. And we will link up. Actually, where do you use Instagram, social media, all of that? Can people connect with you?
I do. I'm old, so I had a hard time getting into this Instagram thing. But now I'm only posting things related to the science of breathing. Mm-hmm. So no puppy pictures or breakfast shots. But I am on Instagram. I'm on Facebook too. There's a Facebook group where there's a lot of researchers, so people can ask questions on that, and a bunch of people pipe in. It's been a very supportive, awesome group if you have specific questions as well.
That's fantastic, and we will link all of that up for sure. Once again, really appreciate you being on. Take care. We'll talk with you soon.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Before you go, I wanted to ask you this question. What if I could teach you in just a couple of hours how to transform your thyroid, hormones, adrenal, cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, weight loss, energy, mood, brain, pregnancy, anti-aging, or many other health-related issues? After 20 years in private practice, after seeing and overseeing 250,000 client appointments, I sincerely feel I have the real-world data and have found the answer you've been searching for. So what I've done is spent hundreds of hours of my own time refining what you need to know in order to uncover your underlying root cause health issues and then begin to rebalance the body and bring it back to a state of robust health and wellness. I'm going to teach you exactly what I do in my private practice so you can understand how you got here and now what you need to do in order to heal. You'll receive all of the important success checklists, protocols, and even ways to customize it to make the program fit your busy life. And you'll get all of this at a fraction of the price. Let me save you the time, money, energy, stress, and frustration of not knowing what to do next. Instead of reading dozens of books on the topic and seeing multiple practitioners, I will condense everything that you need to know in just a few hours of video tutorials that you can watch and listen to anywhere. Together, we will make this healing process an enjoyable one that you can take with you for the rest of your life. I wish you all of the best of health and happiness, and I hope to be able to guide you on your healing journey through my Health Results Accelerators. Simply choose the health imbalance you're currently suffering from, and by the end of today, you'll know what went wrong and how to get well again. I guarantee it. For details, head over now to stephencabral.com/courses.